Hello there, friends. It's your buddy there, Tim Kirby. Got a little bit of bad news just before this live stream started, so forgive me if my tone isn't as jolly as it usually is. But anyways, we've got to fulfill our obligations, and once you declare you're going to do a live stream, you got to do it. So anyways, today's going to be a two-parter. The video you're watching right now is going to discuss the question of why is the war taking so long. After this, I'm going to do a separate live stream in the sense of it'll be a separate video where we'll get into the whole American Village issues, which are also related to why is it taking so long. There's some nuances there. And so anyways, let's begin on our sort of first topic about why the war is taking so long. One major thing that kind of happened to me is I actually finally had a conversation with people in real life, some people who are really knowledgeable about this whole sort of thing, about this very topic, and that's kind of what inspired me. So first off, plagiarism alert, I'm going to be borrowing some ideas from some other people. But the one thing one friend of mine said that I found was very interesting is he sort of laid out the point that Russia essentially can't surrender because, or not surrender, but even negotiate. That was the proper word. He would never say surrender. That was my verbal error. Again, guys, I'm a little off my game today, but we'll get through this. So he kind of made the point that Russia really can't back down and really go to any sort of negotiation because if the sort of Ukraine regime as it stands today continues to exist as this anti-Russia, as they've called it, he made the argument that essentially they'll probably just continue to infinity to sort of do some sort of like minor terror attacks. It'll kind of become a sort of situation. Maybe this is a bad comparison, but it's the only comparison I have in my head right now, which is sort of like an Israel-Palestine thing where, you know, at any moment in time, here come some rockets. Why? Because we don't know. Or vice versa. At any moment in time, something. It would always be like if there were two Palestines right next to each other that both hated each other. More that sort of thing. Obviously, for a lot of you are very passionate on the Palestinian side. I'm not saying the Palestinians are bad. I'm just saying it's the kind of situation where at any moment in time you could expect a rocket to fly. All right? And definitely a lot of things have hit the Palestinians, but in a more, let's just say, organized way. So anyways, that was sort of a point where it's something I kind of thought of, but he really put it into words very precisely that if there isn't some sort of radical change and even some sort of Ukrainian rump state sort of remains, and it remains as this not a part of NATO, which is kind of important, not a part of NATO, yet anti-Russia, this, like the stuff that the people in the Donbass have experienced for, you know, the last decade of just some random shell hits some seemingly random place and kills random people who aren't combatants, will probably carry on sort of to infinity. And like I mentioned about it sort of being like a situation of two Palestines being next together. Again, not the best example, guys, sorry. I've made better analogies. But essentially, we could be looking forward, in quotes, to that sort of situation for potentially generations. Because remember, once a conflict's kind of a cool off, or they get to that negotiation phase, very often the borders sort of stay that way. Like with the whole Nagorno-Karabakh thing, those borders didn't really change for like almost 30 years after the Soviet Union fell. If we look at North and South Korea, well, the Korean War was a long time ago, probably before the overwhelming majority of you were even born. And the way that war ended, that's the way things ended there too. So, you know, that is kind of an interesting argument as to why Russia really couldn't go to the negotiating table, even if it might sound nice at first, because as long as this anti-Russia exists there. In some ways, ironically, if the rump state of Ukraine actually did join NATO, then it would sort of have to behave responsibly in terms of, like, you know, avoiding a nuclear war. So that's kind of a paradox, but that also is unlikely to happen. Another reason, and this is more of an original thought, this isn't just a thought from one of my friends, is I know that the sort of the opinion of the Russian public, and a lot of people in the West, especially people in positions of power who should know better, you've heard them say that, you know, it was like with the Yevgeny Prigozhin thing, that there would be some sort of overthrow of the powers that be here, or with the start of the war, the sanctions would cause an overthrow, and this is an overthrow, an overthrow, an overthrow. So what I'm saying would happen is not going to be the overthrow of anything, but it would definitely be a very negative, strong negative political move. Would be if Russia actually went to the negotiating table right now and sort of completely abandoned Kharkov and my brain isn't working, Odessa. Because those two regions are really the regions that Russians are also, let's just say, feel need to be saved or specifically protected in some sort of special way. The rest of what was called Ukraine in 1991, really, that's kind of open for debate, and I'll put it this way. The rest of it could be left to its own devices. Say at some point there's some sort of major political change there, and everything becomes better in terms of the country not being an anti Russia from their feet to the top of their hairs on their head. Then Russia really could, with the whole Kharkov and Odessa thing, walk away with this thing with really any kind of negotiation, and at least in terms of public perception, it would be considered a major win, and overall society would be happy. Of course, if Russia were to leave those two regions, the public perception of that would be that Russia's essentially leaving them to the dogs, much like that situation in Bucha. Well, the situation in Bucha from the Russian media interpretation, they would assume that this would happen again and again and again until pretty much all the Russian people there might be put to the knives, as certain Maidan activists said they would do many, many years ago, but not just to them. So in terms of like a PR victory, essentially Russia still has a long way to go in terms of its positions and where it's at. Another reason why Russia really can't go to the negotiating table is because of the borders of the regions of the new regions of Russia. Of course, if you are feel that Ukraine is in the right in this conflict, it's kind of strange you're watching this channel in the first place, but that's okay. You're free to listen to opposing opinions. But from the Russian view of things, those regions entered Russia as a whole. And there are sort of some interesting nuances to the new version of the Russian constitution. One, Russia can never, ever, 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 and under any circumstances, reduce in size. Obviously, history affects your laws of your country, and especially your constitution. You know, one of our rights as Americans that we don't get to hear about much is about how the government can't quarter troops in our home. Obviously, that is not really something you'd think would come up very often, and it doesn't seem to. But, for the people who lived through the American Revolution, and I believe like during the 7 Years' War, the British government really would just sort of make you become a hotel for these guys, whether you like it or not. An unpaid hotel for the most part. So there's a reason that sometimes unusual rights or laws can be given. And of course, just to be clear, as someone who lives in Russia that's American and has a lot of views that are pro-Russian, just because it's the Third Amendment right about quartering troops. I forget. Well, the one that relates to quartering troops, it's in the Constitution. It's your right. It stays. Even if it seems obsolete, it stays. Okay? So just to be clear about that. So, anyways, so with Russia has the amendment that essentially says that Russia can never reduce in size. This has to do with going back to, 1991 and the whole collapse of the Soviet Union, because the early Leninists and especially the Trotskyites, well, Lenin's pretty guilty himself. So your Leninists, your Trotskyites, and all of your others who believed that the Soviet Union was supposed to represent internationalism, they basically, one of the reasons why there were these Soviet socialist republics was they kind of wanted to make it look like the Russian Empire was now this new like coalition of nations, almost like today's European Union, that they've sort of coalesced into one completely voluntarily, and they're basically all separate countries, this, that, and the other. So it was kind of this game of like, we're communist internationalists when in certain aspects of like every little republic has its own flag and technically has its own constitution, but it is one country. And it was one country. Okay. So because of this dividing Russia into these weird republics, it sort of, in the early 90s, really gave way for the, for certain questionable leaders of questionable morals to divide up Russia. So the Russian Constitution as it stands today is essentially, it's a one-way street. Once you're in Russia forever. Okay? And unless they were to change the Constitution again, which that would be a hard amendment to get rid of, these places are now considered part of Russia. But the entire, territory of these new states, these 4 new states, is not completely under Russian control. So in a lot of ways, Russia legally really couldn't negotiate a surrender of any of that territory because, again, you can always get into some verbal gymnastics of, well, the Zaporozhye region, it's really defined as where our troops are or whatever. But when these regions entered Russia, the way their borders on the map of 1991 are the borders that they're supposed to have according, to Russian law. So essentially, Russia is very much stuck into a position where any agreement that would be proposed that doesn't essentially completely free up these 4 new states totally, the 100% of their territory, is a no-go. It's not possible. The Constitution is, the highest law of the land, and, there's no way around that, is there? That's one thing where I actually feel a little bit good about myself as an expert because you don't really hear that one come up too often when you hear our friends talk to Judge Napolitano. So that's another reason why the war here is going to continue to take a long time. These are some of the reasons essentially why Russia can't negotiate. Another reason why the war is going to take a while because the muddy season is coming up. Russia has made some sort of incremental gains, but it would seem that the overall strategy of Russia was to not do anything radical, not do anything risky, try to keep as many men alive as possible while really, really liquidating the other side. And again, guys, to this day, I'm still shocked that the sort of summer counteroffensive thing that they at least attempted to do exactly what they said they were going to do, that they said for months in advance. Like, that's shocking. Because they basically said, and it was all over, especially the Russian media and the Western media too, that they try to kind of like cut a wedge between Russia's new territorial gains and push towards the Crimean Peninsula there. I guess, what they say, to take over the land bridge or whatever. And that's exactly what they tried to do. And the Russians were completely prepared for it. And, not surprising. If you give the enemy your playbook, and not just a playbook, maybe a 3-page playbook where that has there's only one option really. So a 1-page playbook. That's a bad idea. And yet they did it, which is, that'll be one of the baffling mysteries that is going to go down in history. But anyways, the muddy season is coming up, and the Russians are not going to, barring some sort of tactical doctrine that I'm not aware of, or I don't know. I'm trying to say more mechanical means or something. Let's just say, barring some sort of surprise, it is very unlikely that they're going to do anything other than sort of gain, a half a kilometer here or half a kilometer there, going through the muddy season, because it's just not going to be physically possible to advance. And like I said, it seems as though the real mission is to just completely break the other side. That, if the other side was concerned about territory and movement, it seems like the Russians are fighting the war to just completely eliminate the other side down to the end. And, of course, just to remember, guys, that I'm a human being, and although we can all jump into moments of tribalism, there's this thing, and it's called God. And we shouldn't take glee in the deaths of our enemies. We should try to kind of restrain ourselves from that, because it would be much better if everyone could have worked out this thing, or if it would have been possible through good Russian marketing to convince a lot of people in Ukraine, the Western Ukraine, that they're actually very, very similar to Russians, and that there's really nothing to fight over. But that didn't happen. So I think we've kind of covered a bit about why the war from the Russian side is going to go forward into the future. Like I said, we have the fact that the public is not going to be particularly satisfied if Odessa and Kharkov are left to the dogs. Russia really can't leave itself with this weird anti-Russia on its border. That's also not going to work out. The weather is going to get bad, and everything's going to get muddy pretty soon. And again, it's going to enter the sort of autumn season of limited movement. So just in a pure physical sense, it's unlikely for things to move. And I think I mentioned another point that's slipping. And the Russian Constitution is not going to let them essentially say that the border, sort of the military line as it is today, could be the border. Again, barring some sort of legal tricks, because as we all know, unfortunately, sometimes really obvious constitutional, let's just say, there wouldn't be laws, because I want to say amendments, but not necessarily are they all amendments. If a certain country has a constitution that's written from the beginning the way they wanted it, we could say constitutional declared rights. That these constitutionally declared rights, they are the top of the law, but they can be manipulated, as we've all seen in whatever country that we come from, but especially over the last 30 years in the United States, to my great chagrin. So anyways, I need to check one thing. As I said, friends, I've been having some kind of, that is not related. Okay, that is something completely different, and that is a good thing. I don't need any more bad news today, that is for sure. Anyways, remember, friends, if you want to comment, if you comment on the Tim Kirby Russia Hardcore, basically if you comment anywhere in the chat, I should be able to see it, but it'd be really best to comment under the thing like the live stream tonight, or Telegram live stream starts in 15 minutes. That's a lot easier for me to see, so we could do that. But anyways, I wanted to cover and again, forgive my dour mood, bad news on the horizon. I'll live. Other people unfortunately won't. The Ukrainian side of things. Now, of course, we could all say, perhaps, Tim, you're biased. You're on the Russian side of the line. That means you absorb a lot more of a Russian filter of reality. But that's kind of why you come to this channel to listen in the first place, isn't it? Right? So yes, perhaps there's some bias, but when we sort of look in through, let's just say, the lens of the independent media, and even the independent media that involves Western people who live completely in the West and don't speak a word of Russian, then we sort of get to see that with them, they're kind of really stuck between a rock and a hard place, because, well, it's really a lot of their destiny is really in the hands, especially even now more so than in the past, of Washington. So if we really think about it, because Washington is now paying for all their government functions, all their Social Security and hospitals and whatever else. Basically, the United States is essentially paying to prop up their government. And as we know, obviously the Russians have hit, I would have to say, we would have to assume after all this time and all of the big explosions, pretty much all of their arms manufacturing. So essentially everything that goes into the war zone has to come from the NATO realm, or maybe even beyond. So that is definitely not a particularly good recipe. But remember, until there's some sort of like debt crash, death of the dollar sort of moment, the United States has a ton of money. Because remember, as we shared that Kim.com, a very interesting chap we'd love to have in the program, pointed out that, at that point, Washington had already spent twice as much as like the entire Russian military budget on just the war in Ukraine without really gaining any results. But the thing is, when you're already $37 trillion in debt, and especially if you sort of believe that the debt's never really going to come to a head or need to be repaid or something, then you can just keep funding it. So on the one hand, the Russian side definitely has the seemingly infinite resources of missiles and drones and arms and all that. But Washington, despite the fact that the de-dollarization virus has spread, across the globe is still able to essentially shovel huge amounts of money into this project Ukraine, and they are certainly not going to give up on it. And as many experts who are maybe more astute than I am and really understand American politics have been saying, they're pretty sure that Biden does not want to lose this one. Why he's so obsessed with re-election, I don't know, especially when he seems so mentally confused because of his age. I don't quite know, but hey, possibly narcissism is a hell of a drug, you know, or cocaine in your youth. But anyways, so it seems like this the outcome of the war could have a major effect on the next elections, and of course, we all know what orange-tinted man is absolutely crushing it on the Republican side, although he might be put in jail. We'll see about that. But ultimately, you lose the massive war. You spend an insane amount of money, especially when there have been other crises in the United States where money could have been spent or maybe just not spent at all. And so, yeah, it could definitely, a loss, a grand loss, could really sway how things are going. One other thing, too, about the West that I was kind of thinking about, and I don't quite know how to formulate this. It would be great if Joaquin Flores was listening right now, because he could actually probably put this into words better than I could. But Joaquin, I think, is asleep. He likes to work in the morning. Anyways, we also have to think that, you know, there are a lot of people who we accuse, we being the sort of alternative media space, accuse of being bad people, okay? And maybe sometimes we're unfair, you know, because the trial of public opinion doesn't have a lot of evidence or lawyers or a fair judge or an impartial jury, you know what I mean? So who knows? Maybe we've got George Soros wrong. Maybe we've got Bill Gates wrong. Who else do we accuse of being part of something? Schwab. Maybe this whole, you know, Fourth Industrial Revolution, Great Reset stuff. Maybe it's not as bad as it seems to us or something. Who knows? But the thing I can tell you for sure is that if there were, well, first off, those people, as we've gone into a more BRICS world, a more de-dollarized world, a world of this rising global south, I'm wondering how comfortable those people feel at this point in time for their personal safety outside the territory of what we would consider the West. Like, would any of them go to China right now? Well, you could say, well, Kissinger went to China. Well, he has a relationship with them, and he's a little bit different. I don't know. I'm not sure. You know, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe they're still traveling all over the world or whatnot, willy-nilly. But I think they're sort of territory where they have free reign to go without being ever punished for any potential crimes they may have possibly committed. That area of the world is kind of shrunk. And imagine if some sort of political or economic crisis were to happen connected with the end of the war. What if, you know, the war ends and it's considered en masse to be a loss? Would that be the death of NATO? Would that be some sort of turning point in European history? Because remember, the map of Europe changes a lot after major wars. Like, you know, most of the time, without some sort of major war, the maps of the world kind of stay the same until the violence starts. So you could definitely say, you know, World War I, World War II changed the way the map looked like. Korea was one big peninsula until the Korean War, and the results of the war determined what that peninsula looks like today. So you kind of get what I mean. But with these people, if there was to be these sort of grand changes, that could be really dangerous for them. And they still have a lot of money, and they still have a lot of influence, and they might be really, really heavily vested in keeping this thing going. See what I'm getting at? See where I'm getting at? Because, you know, if the West goes, they go with it. Sorry, we're getting a little conspiratorial here today. A little conspiratorial, maybe too conspiratorial. But I think that that's one thing that we don't talk about too much in the alternative media as one of the reasons why the war has to keep going. Because, you know, if the United States were to enter some sort of crisis or, you know, God forbid, lose its sovereignty, there's not going to be any Miami mansions for anybody. You see? Okay. So anyways, guys, I am going to read through some of your questions there. If anyone wants to talk, now would be the time to talk. After this, I'm going to actually stop this transmission for a brief moment. Then we'll get on to our second live stream of the night, which will be about why the American village is taking so long. This is why the war is taking so long, because neither side could surrender, even if they wanted to. Neither side really can negotiate, even if they wanted to. We are sort of stuck in a very, very dangerous, tense game. And I wish I was a less nervous person. So, anyways, let's take a look at some of your comments. If someone wants to call in, you use the raise your hand function, and you can come in on the air, and everything will be Jim Dandy. Unfortunately, something is making a weird noise, so I'm going to vanish from your screen right now, but don't worry, I'll be like right back. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, I am back. Sorry about that. Let's go with, there I am. All right, so anyways, let's read your comments, and if someone wants to call in, you can call in. If you don't want to call in, that's fine. Let's see. All this time I thought New York Moscow time difference was only 7 hours, not 8, until we go off daylight savings time. I'm not sure, but it does change. Sometimes it's 7 hours, sometimes it's 8, and yeah, there is no daylight savings in Russia anymore. There was, and it's gone. Peter writing, I was going to bed early, but I'll stay up for this one. Thanks, Peter. I hope you're with us, and I hope you enjoyed the opinion I shared, or feel it's at least semi-valid. Maybe you disagree. I just checked a time converter. I think you're right. Moscow 11 p.m., London, New York 4 p.m. Interesting. Maybe you guys already had your daylight savings. I'll try to fix that next time. Only way I see this war ending sooner than later is cutting the snake's head in Ukraine. Same thing has been attempted in Russia, says Mo. Well, the one thing, Mo, you have to remember is that, you know, if we're going to always say, Zelensky, he's just some sort of puppet, you know, he was sort of the Manchurian candidate, well, if Manchuria was a sub-region of Washington, D.C., you know what I mean? So I think the one thing that some Russians sort of hopefully think is, well, what if they turn against him and kill him? They'll create chaos, and then this will all end. I think, guys, unfortunately, that's sort of just wishful thinking. Because if he were to meet an untimely end, I think that someone would probably just jump in and take the spot. It would just be the next guy who would say the next things that a lot of people in Washington want to hear. So I don't quite agree with that. Mo continues, for some reason, I see this option having more chance in Ukraine than Russia, but I got to be missing something since I don't see any signs of it. Okay, well, the chances of something like that happening in Russia as of present are very, very, very small. Oh, yeah, as someone answered, Jay answered, the snake's head isn't in Ukraine. See, well, Jake and I, or Jay, excuse me, you're not Jake, you're Jay. Jay and I think alike. Anyways. Timothy writes, another Timothy. Hello, my name brother, namesake. You are correct. EST is currently, it's about the whole day. Okay, well let's not talk about, that's enough discussion of daylight savings time. I need to check my time zone converter more often. Someone is sending disco music. That is not appropriate. Are you taking the about negotiation after 2014 or 2022? Well, if you're speaking to me, we are, of course, talking about what's happening right now. This is, we're getting into current events, my friend. If you're talking to someone else, I'm sorry I didn't understand you. Uglarod writing, USAID fully props up Ukraine, including the pension system. Yeah, we kind of just talked about that. So, again, if Washington were to just say one day, you know what, we don't like this anymore, we found an exit out of this, and they essentially cut the lifeline, it's over. And that's one thing that's going to also, one thing I do want to talk about in the future is sort of what the world is going to look like in the sort of de-dollarized global south multipolar world. Because one thing is, if Washington wasn't stopped being able to cut all these checks, as we say, although, you know, a lot of times they're not really checks, but you know what I mean, that's the expression, it wouldn't just be Ukraine that would change. I think there'd be a lot of changes all over the place. And we'd also definitely find out together to what extent is, you know, Israel self-sufficient, or to what extent does it actually live on U.S. Kind of welfare. Because I have heard good arguments to prove both cases. So, but unfortunately, although that's an intellectual curiosity, when and if that does happen, it's going to be a very... finding out the solution will probably involve a lot of people dying, which will be sad. USAID also funds Ukraine PR army and propaganda. Well, yeah. I mean, with a war that has consumed more than a fourth of the territory of the country, if you were to conclude the Crimea to that, you know, and all the miles and miles and miles of territory around the war zone, and all the things that have been hit beyond it, and all those like electrical substations that they sort of destroyed in spring. It's, you know, how are you going to maintain a profitable media company given, you know, these circumstances, like a private sector media company within Ukraine, trying to maintain that without someone helping is just not going to happen. It's just not viable, you know. What kind of major advertisers are you going to attract? You know what I mean? So, yeah. Okay, the system keeps telling me someone's writing, but I don't think they are. I don't believe it. Sam Oak, it looks like I need to visit Russia with my Russian citizen wife, pick an area to get quota, stay in the area, pass the language test once the quota is affirmed. Then I need to apply for temp residency. Dude, you've got this all wrong. You've got this all wrong. Like... Wait 8 months after I received it and then apply for permanent residency. Oh, dude. But it's not your fault. It's not your fault. Let's see. Some more mercenaries killed. Not surprising. Well, mercenaries in quotes. Who knows? Anyways, guys, since no one wants to call in today, I think, and again, like I said, not the best day in my personal life. I think we're probably going to call it here, and then we're going to go over to the American Village. So let me stop recording. In 3, 2, 1, goodbye, everybody.